I wanted to make a joke about how crowded the phone booth would be, but I'm worried much of our audience doesn't know what a phone booth is. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Reign of the Supermen. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me on this epic journey into the action-packed Reign of Supermen as part of our Summer of Superman is the last son of pop culture. Please welcome Nicholas Pepin.
I remember what a phone booth is, but you pulled in one of your oldest guest hosts for this, so...
Yeah.
Maybe not the oldest, but I'm up there.
Yeah, well, there's nothing wrong with that. It means you're more seasoned. You have more knowledge. You know more things.
Well, let's stick with that.
All right, well, we are continuing our Summer of Superman with Reign of the Supermen, the animated movie from 2019. In fact, it was released January 13th of 2019. This was, of course, the follow-up to Death of Superman, which if you did not listen to that episode with Bethany and I, go back a couple of episodes and you will find that review. So we will continue that here. But Nicholas, I have to ask, when was the first time you saw this Reign of Superman animated movie?
About 2 months ago.
Really?
So I watched it because we had talked about doing it, and I was like, sure, why not? I'm All right, well, to take a step back, when I was in high school in 92, 93, when this whole thing started, I remember, like, when I was younger, I read comics. The library had comics. My parents would buy me some occasionally. Then I kind of lost it for a few years. But then when the Death of Superman happened, just like you and Chad have been talking about, it got me interested again. I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
What is going on over there? I mean, it did something I don't know if it has ever happened since, where it started making like nationwide news. Like it was like headline news, like the death of Superman. Like, I mean, I know that sometimes certain comic things have been talked about, but like not as like a storyline since then. A friend of mine, his dad worked for some entertainment company, so he got Death of Superman comics. So we got to read them. Like he had the polybag that, of course, we ripped open, and we're like, oh, we're not keeping this.
That's why you had to buy two.
Yeah. So I read them, and then so like I talked to my parents. We were on vacation somewhere in North Georgia, Dahlonega probably, and I talked them into letting me go into a comic book store, and I bought a bunch of the Reign of Superman books. But this is, of course, in the days before the internet.
Yeah.
So I didn't have the ability to like know which ones I needed to buy, and there was so many different titles. I guarantee you what I read was out of order, so I probably
I'm sure.
I know I didn't finish reading it, probably because I just got confused and I was like, I don't even know what's going on. But I know in my
even buying the four titles that would come out in the same month, like knowing which one to read first.
Right.
Like, yeah.
And that was, I don't know if maybe the comic book, the cliche comic book guy was there in the early 90s the way it was definitely or is kind of now, where like, there's the gatekeeper, or like, oh, you don't know about comic books, and they don't want to talk to you. But I was a punk kid, so I probably thought I knew better.
Didn't we all?
Didn't even think to ask. So like I have vague memories of the storyline and certain aspects of it. So it wasn't like I went into the movie blind and never having knowing it. But I watched it. And then I was like, I missed a lot. So I had to go back and watch Death of Superman first, because I did not realize.
That's what I was going to ask, is did you watch Death first?
I did not have, I did, well, I didn't. And I was very confused. So I went back and watched Death of Superman. And then the next night I watched Reign of Superman. And it made way more sense and was a much more enjoyable movie.
Yeah, I do. This is kind of like when they put out The Return of the Dark Knight as a part 1 and a part 2, like you have to watch it all together. And they did eventually release this one. They called it The Death and Return of Superman, and it was just a continuous movie. You can't watch this one by itself, I don't think, at all. You have to have watched Death before you can sit and watch this one.
As
But
somebody who did it, I can attest to that.
it was directed by Sam Liu, just like the first movie. Although the second director I don't know if he didn't return for this one. This one was written by Tim Sheridan, who was a big writer for DC. Anyone who's reading comic books more recently, he is the writer behind Teen Titans Academy. And then it was also written by Jim Krieg, who is a Hollywood screenwriter. Although his claim to fame are the Lego movies. Not the theatrical Lego movies, the straight-to-video Lego movies.
Okay, so not the good ones. Not the
ones,
Lord and Miller ones.
But yeah, that was, when you look through his IMDb, it's just Lego, 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 all the way down. Mostly the DC ones, which works. So, again, I asked you if you saw Death first, and then you kind of hit this a little bit, but, had you... over the course of the 90s to now, have you really been familiar with the actual comic book storyline?
Yeah, yes. Like I said, I read it a long time ago. I watched that Doomsday movie. Like I think I bought that one.
Yeah.
I've encountered the storyline in the past. Like I mean, they've done various different versions of it. Over time. Batman vs Superman had a brief abbreviated version of it. They've done it animated at least twice that I can think of. And then I'm fairly certain. Just knowing comic books or living in that world, like I've definitely come across it.
Yeah, because some of and we'll get into this a little bit more, but some of the characters that were introduced in Reign are still around today. So, it has been a storyline that has held the test of time. But let's go ahead and get into the characters. Of course, this is most of the same characters from Death of Superman. So we're not going to get into probably great detail unless Nicholas wants to talk about some of them. And then when it comes to the Supermen, we're going to go into more depth with them in the second half of the show with the moving panels, just because of them being the primary focus of the comic as well. But let's just go ahead and run through the list. So we got Superman, once again, being voiced by Jerry O'Connell. We've got Lois Lane, voiced by Rebecca Romijn, his wife. Rainn Wilson, providing the voice of Lex Luthor. Then we get into the Supermen. Superboy is voiced by Cameron Monaghan, who many will know as the Joker from Gotham. John Henry Irons is voiced by Black Lightning himself, Cress Williams. Hank Henshaw, aka Cyborg Superman, is voiced by Patrick Fabian. He's one of those, oh yeah, I know that guy, character actor, if you ever look him up. Then Eradicator was voiced by Charles Halford, who is also the voice of Bibbo. For those of you who remember the Constantine short-lived series, he was Chaz, the driver. And then Darkseid, which, surprise, surprise, Darkseid's in this one, voiced by Candyman himself, Tony Todd. And then we've got the Justice League, which I mentioned all in the previous episode, so you can go back and hear all of those. So, based off of the main focus characters of this one, I'm going to ask you the question, then we can go into detail. But Nicholas, who of those do you want to see again, and who do you wish would take a crystal to the forehead?
I would like to see, honestly, is poorly used as he was in this movie, I'd like to see more of Steel. Like, okay. I really like the concept of Steel. I mean, I know it's essentially just a ripoff of Iron Man, but...
especially this one.
Right. But Shaquille O'Neal movie withstanding, I think that character could make a really good movie. I think it could be really fascinating and really well done if they treated it seriously. Well,
have you seen the Superman and Lois TV show? Because he's a character, like a side character.
Oh, and that's the new CW one?
Yes.
No, I haven't had a chance to watch that one yet. So
yeah, he's like, his partner in crime, Superman's ally. So you get to see him take it, like you said, take it more seriously. But yeah, definitely in this one, he's a lot more Iron Man, especially when he arrives at his lair and he does the walk down the hall and the suit's just coming off of him. Very reminiscent of from the Avengers when Tony did it. So
And I would say it's hard to separate the characters, but the one that annoyed me the most was Hank Henshaw.
okay,
Not necessarily when he was cyborg, but just as
yeah,
like Hank. Like just toss him away. And we'll get to that
yeah,
in a minute, I'm sure.
yeah. He was very whiny.
Yeah.
No, I'll agree with you on that. I'm gonna be honest. I agree with you with Steel. I'd like to see them maybe do another. I would like to see more animated stuff with Steel because you can do a lot more. I'm still really torn. I want to ask you this because this might make me decide who I dislike more. What are your thoughts of Rainn Wilson being Lex Luthor?
I having listened to your previous episode, I know what your feelings on it are.
Yeah,
Um it does kind of take me out of it a little bit because that voice is so Dwight,
yeah.
but he does play it effectless enough that like he is at least trying not to be Dwight. I don't know. I was torn. Like, cause half the movie I was like, I'm okay with it. Like, it's okay. Like, I thought he was doing a good job, and then other parts of it, I was like, this is just white. Like, it's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I was torn. It didn't bother me as much as I know it bothered you guys. But that and like, like Rainn Wilson being like in the rocker and some other stuff that I've really enjoyed. Like, I have the ability to say he's not just white.
No, no, no,
So,
no.
I don't know if he pulls off menacing enough. I guess I want my Lex Luthor to be a little bit more menacing. You know, I guess that's why I never really liked Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. Like I don't see him as very menacing.
Part of me thinks it's also how much it's so weird to hear Batman in an animated movie and it not be Kevin Conroy. I think the same thing with Lex Luthor and it's not Clancy Brown.
Yeah, and that could be that that's the I'm more expecting like that that deeper voice or that more just the
Like
voice that
gravel, yeah.
yeah. I mean, because Clancy Brown can be a good guy every bit as much as he can be a
Oh
bad
yeah.
guy, but when he can turn that voice on, it is, he's got bad guy voice.
Which brings me to the other one that I'm torn about. Darkseid. So here we have Tony Todd, who has an amazing voice, but I don't know what he did for this Darkseid voice. That for me it didn't work. I mean, he was the voice of Zoom for the Flash, the CW Flash series for that season,
Right.
and he is so evil as the voice of Zoom, which I know has a little bit of effect to it. But I just know his voice is so much. I mean, for him being the Candyman, with him being the mortician in the Final Destination movies, and there was something to this voice just didn't seem menacing enough or evil enough to be Darkseid.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I guess just because when I hear Tony Todd's voice, I automatically go, okay, well he's evil.
Yeah, well, true.
I
Yeah,
just was like, I kind of bought it. And I mean, and if anybody's gonna voice Darkseid, I mean, I guess I mean, maybe if they let Tony Todd do more of just Tony Todd.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I could see that. I mean, I guess I didn't think much because he is for much of it like he's supposedly the main bad guy of the whole movie. Like he's barely in it.
Well, and that's the other reason why I kind of put Darkseid in this because it's obvious that Darkseid is put in this because they're setting it up for the like Apocalypse War movie that was going to come later for him being the overarching bad guy, kind of the same way that you see Thanos in Avengers, even though Loki's the bad guy. But what I didn't like was to me it diminished Cyborg Superman a little bit because and I know we're getting into this a little bit more now, but in the comics he is Cyborg Superman is the main bad guy. There is Mongol, but Mongol is working for Cyborg Superman. To now have Cyborg Superman being this minion of Darkseid, I think it just took away from the reign of Superman story, and so
Yeah,
that's
I would absolutely agree with that because it did feel so forced and
yeah.
so out of place. Even if I had completely remembered that Mongol was supposed to be there, which is a character I barely remember existing and don't know if I could pick out of a lineup right now anyway.
Well,
Um,
yeah,
but yeah, I mean, I do. They're vague, and obviously, as I'm watching the movie, or since I watched the movie, I did a lot more Wikipedia deep diving and reading the storyline. So like I'm aware of, that Mongol and Cyborg teamed up, and then whatever happened there, and Darkseid was never part of the story in the first
No.
place. He did not send Doomsday in a comet to, or Earth in the first place like he did in this movie. But I just, I don't know. I'm sure we'll get there in a minute, but
Well, I think with this one, I do like, and I mentioned this back with the Death of Superman. I do like how they explain, well, where's the Justice League? Well, they take care of them in this one. Send them to another
right,
dimension. It just didn't feel as big. So whereas in the comic, you had the destruction of Coast City and him building Engine City, and the idea was to turn Earth into a new war world, while Cyborg Superman got his revenge on Superman, and for this one to just be, oh, he's gonna take over the, he's gonna create like a police state with all of these robot people. Which, let me ask you, so are we, based off of that final little moment where the woman's looking over, Eric, oh Eric, are we to believe all these people died?
I wasn't sure about that because it looked like Eric turned back into Eric,
Yeah,
but it
but was
didn't.
he dead?
But he didn't say whether he was dead or not. I
He
don't
doesn't
know.
move.
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't sure, and I thought I like the first time I watched it, I was like, what is going on here? And then the second time, I was almost as confused. So I guess I feel a little better that somebody who's probably watched it way more than I have is equally as confused about that. But
Yeah, there's a lot of gray area with the quote unquote killing people, because it was the same thing with the Eradicator. Because in the comics, I mean, when he blasts some of the villains, like he eradicates them, like they just turn into dust. Whereas this one, it was just like blast and they knock them back, but we don't really know, is he murdering these people?
I'm sure because it was animated, DC Warner Brothers had a mandate of no death or no. I mean, there was clearly some people who got killed, but they
Yeah,
were they kind of happened a little off screen, or or the like the whole thing with Mercy, like when he's like thank you and he grabs Mercy and Eradicator shoots her, and then
yeah.
and then
Well,
later and
he does later say that she's
the
recovering.
right he clearly killed her, right? That was, I mean,
Yeah,
she was dead. And then later there was that, like, well, she's in the hospital interaction, or
yeah.
it was like, wait, come on now, so that was a censor saw that and was like, well, you can't have that in a kids movie.
Uh,
Let's
I
throw in
mean,
this line.
they had it rated PG-13. I mean, why not? I don't. I mean, they clearly killed people in Death of Superman, because at the beginning,
Yeah,
when Doomsday rips apart the Atlanteans and the couple of people that Lex sent out,
yeah,
I mean, you see an arm float by.
right,
So
yeah, that is true. I guess
yeah,
maybe it's okay to kill Atlanteans, but it's just not okay to kill humans. I don't.
there could be something to that. So any of the other, because you weren't in the Death of Superman episode, so any thoughts on anybody else, like Jerry O'Connell being the voice of Superman, Rebecca Romaine being the voice of Lois?
I mean, I don't know if Jerry O'Connell was doing a voice or it was some sort of modulator they gave him. Like it was very clear it was Rebecca Romaine. Like that was,
Yes.
yeah. It wasn't. I mean, like there were parts where I was like, oh, that's Jerry O'Connell, and other parts I'm like, is this the same guy from the first movie? Like
Yeah.
and I know he also did a part of the Cyborg Superman voice with a
Yeah, I
modulator.
think yeah, I think they did it where it was part his voice and then part um I forgot who I said. Oh, Patrick Fabian. Patrick Fabian. But then when he goes full evil, it loses the Jerry O'Connell part of it.
Yeah, I couldn't, when they were still trying to trick you into thinking that, Cyborg Superman was actually Superman.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there was a couple of the Justice League. Like I thought, like Rosario Dawson did a really good job as Wonder Woman. I did not
Mhm.
care for the costume. I guess that was probably more the New 52
Yeah, they were
costume,
going
but
for the new 52.
Nathan Fillion. as Green Lantern. I mean, just give me
It's
more.
just great. Yes.
Give me more of that live action. Give me animated. Just give me more Nathan Fillion Green Lantern. You know.
Yeah. He's so good as Hal Jordan. Love it. So you talked about the new 52. What did you think of? Let's talk about the look of the characters. Yeah, she had the new 52, which represented the DC characters. But when Superman comes back, of course they do the long hair and the black suit. But did you notice that there's a costume change when he has the full suit on at the very end? That's not the same suit that he was wearing in Death of Superman?
No, I did not notice that.
Yeah. Now he doesn't have the red tights still, but it's not as. I always said the new 52 suit almost looked like he was wearing just this like thin armor. They go back to the more traditional look. He doesn't have the high collar. When you see him at the end, he's back down to the low,
Okay.
neckline. And it's the brighter blue, not that darker kind of two-toned blue that he had. So they do make the costume a little bit more traditional looking at the end. When you see him do the traditional, shirt rip and then flying off. What'd you think of this look for Superboy to kind of still look like it was from the 90s, but update it just a little bit?
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with the Superboy character to begin with. I know that I'm guessing much like Robin, there's been multiple Superboys
Um,
because I know there was Superboys before this Superboy.
so no. Uh, this Superboy, when he was introduced in 92, 93, this was the first Superboy that wasn't Clark Kent.
Okay, all right. Because this now I know with New 52, because DC, unlike Marvel, when they decide to do a big event, it's basically to do a universe resetting. Like we have
Yeah,
to blow it all. We've gotten everything is out of order. Nothing is making sense. We've got six different Batman that are all
yeah.
doing different things. We blow it all up. Infinite on Crisis Earth again, and start over again. That's what they did with the New 52. That's what they did. So I don't know who's still around and who was where, which is why I'm confused on the Superboy character.
It is a bit confused. I actually had this in my notes for later, but since we're talking about it, so the Superboy that I think more people today are picturing, the one with the blue jeans, the black shirt, the red S, and the short hair, that is technically the same Superboy.
Okay.
You're not wrong that they've kind of retconned him, but it is the same Superboy. Now,
Okay.
back in the 92 93 run, when he was this one, with the leather jacket, the earring, the very the sunglasses, very 90s look. He was a clone, and he was a clone of Superman, but there was also a human element of him. You actually find out in the comics that the human element was Westfield, the director of Cadmus,
Okay.
who, for those of you who remember, if you listen back to me and Chad's episode one shots, he was the one that was trying to steal Superman's body and Doomsday's body. But you end up finding out he is the other element. They didn't do the Lex element until more recently. And so him being part Superman, part Lex, which I do think is a better,
Right.
story.
Yeah. Now,
Um,
was that is that more recent development because they did it in the movie and they're just like, yeah, well, people liked it,
no,
or
no, no, it was before the movie.
okay, all right,
But yeah, but he later donned the name Con L, Kon hyphen El, which then as a alter ego is where he gets Connor Kent.
okay,
So, but no, he is the same one that people recognize with Young Justice with the black shirt and the red S. He is technically the same Superboy. The only other Superboy, unless my brain's just not working right, the only other Superboy that has been in existence was Jonathan Kent, Superman's son.
okay.
But no, this Superboy was the first quote unquote Superboy. Any
Oh,
Superboy before that was just Clark Kent as a young
oh,
kid.
okay, all right. Well, and again, not being as deep into DC. In fact, I was thinking about this morning. I think this might be the first DC episode that I've been a part of. I think everything has been Marvel up until now. So.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
Mazel tov.
yeah. And I think I'm going to definitely be showing my lack of interest in the DC franchise because I don't know as much stuff. I mean, I really like all comic book stuff. So don't,
Yeah,
I'm not saying like, oh, I just don't like DC. It's just when it comes to reading, I prefer Marvel. So, that's
hey,
why I'm confused
I'm
on that's
not
why
gonna
I'm
fault you for that.
confused on some of the storylines of it. I mean, I have read it, and I do have an entire long box full of DC stuff, so it's not like I don't.
Yeah.
But
I mean, there's so many of the same writers that it's like you can't go wrong either way. Like,
right, one does a long run for one company. It's like I'm kind of bored over here. I'm gonna go over
yeah,
there, and as we said with Steel, I mean, they just straight up pretty much stole Iron Man. And then you were talking about how they completely did the Fantastic Four story.
oh yeah, the Hank, which they didn't really allude to
No, no,
in
they
this
didn't.
movie, but in the comics they most definitely did. But speaking of, let's talk about the look of Cyborg Superman. What did you think of this look compared
I
to the comic version?
I thought this look, I don't know, like there was part of me that was just like, how did you not know he was the bad guy? Just look at him. Like, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, many
he
people will say that with the comic version too, but I do agree a little bit more with this animated version. Like he just looks evil to begin with.
right, yeah, I mean, he looks bad. Like I mean, he's got the evil looking face and
I like the comic version look better though, because I think he looks more like he could be Superman.
right.
Whereas this one, there was just that one little patch of face around the right eye with that little patch of hair. And other than that, he was. I mean, even with the suit and all, he just looked entirely robotic. I don't think this one was as believable to go. Maybe that could be Superman.
Yeah. Well, and and when they get to like when they start doing the androids of everybody becomes like robot people.
Yeah,
Like the first one, like how did everybody go? Nope, this is evil. That's the whole. We just saw
yeah.
this.
No,
Like
that's not right.
this, we just saw when the Justice League disappeared. That's the exact same type of material every one of them people had right there. What is this? It's all
Yeah,
this is all dark side. Like, come on now, you're not you're
yeah.
not
That
fooling us.
yeah. The little thing he puts on their chest plate. I'm like that. Very much looks like a mother box, or at least a variation of one. So yeah. There was a lot where this one. It's because to me that was one of the best things about the comic run is for a while there people really were wondering, is one of these guys actually going to be Superman? Like,
Yes,
is this really going to? I mean, obviously, we knew John Henry Irons wasn't actually Superman, but as Chad and I have talked about, they did make you believe maybe he now had the soul of Superman, the spirit of Superman, and it really was a question. Who would be the true Superman? Little did we know they would just bring the traditional Superman back, but
I mean I think we all knew they were going to eventually, but
see,
any
I don't. In the '90s, like you said, pre-internet, the fact that this was one of the first of its kind in terms of storytelling, I
when
really
did
don't think people knew that he would come back
when did Nightfall happen?
after.
Okay. Because I know that was the whole thing of like, oh, they broke Batman's back. He's not Bat. Azrael is Batman now, and you're like, yeah, just until he gets better, or they get a new writer, you know. But I mean, I can't remember in the '80s. Obviously I wasn't reading comics in the '80s as much, but Superman wasn't like the first character the major character they killed because they kill people all the time. And then, a couple years later or, whatever, like when they killed Captain America with Civil War, they're like, this is permanent. This is done. Like, it's done. Like, this is, and then, like,
Yeah, but see again, that came after, and
whoa,
so
yeah, no, you're
yes, we're
right.
we're now we're now all of a sudden we're going, yeah, this doesn't last. But when they did it to Superman in 92, 93, when they did it to I mean, you're talking the superhero. They had never done this to this level before.
Right. You're right. And they, and I think maybe that's why it did reach the nationwide news that it did because, I mean, you had talked about in one of the previous episodes they had done a Death of Superman story, but it was always by like the end of the episode he was better.
Yeah,
Like,
or the very next issue.
right, yeah,
They just rubbed it. I mean, of course, and that was also back in the '60s where there really weren't a lot of overarching storylines either.
yeah.
You
So
could just pick up a single issue and read a story from beginning to end.
yeah, so I mean, it's possible that maybe we didn't know, and that it's just 30 years of having seen it in on both sides of the story, both sides of the aisle. That I'm just like, well, of course he was going to come back. NERD, no one really ever dies, um, unless you're Uncle
Well,
Ben.
unless you're Uncle Ben, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think this one, because I even remember Nightfall, because Nightfall I think was the very next year. I think it was '94, and when they broke Batman's back, I think part of me did question, like, okay, is this just how they're switching over from Bruce Wayne to another Batman? But at the same time, this is after Death of Superman, and almost like I said, a year after Death of Superman, and so you do now have that because it wasn't even a full year from Death of Superman to Return to Superman. So you're going, okay, so a few months from now he'll be back,
Yeah.
and
So
and
with Doomsday, in the original book, and not obviously in this movie, Doomsday just shows up and he's an unstoppable force until they have to basically kill each other to stop each other.
yeah,
How long is it? Because I feel like it was a long time before they actually started exploring the backstory and giving. Because I was going through the Wikipedia of like where he actually came from and what his motivations were, or I guess for being a creature that had no real motivations, just you know, a singular moving target of just destruction. Um, I feel like it wasn't like immediately after. Like they just kind of were like, well, we had Doomsday, he killed Superman, and then he's done. But then people were still so fascinated by this story and this arc
yeah.
that I
So
think they.
it was like a year later. I think it was also '94. They released the 3 issue Hunter Prey series, which is the one that tells Doomsday's origin and gave him his origin and showing where he came from Krypton and all that. Yeah, that was, and they even have the rematch between the two. But they did that, and then it would be much later. They would do like the Doomsday Wars. I think that was in 2015, 2016, maybe. But no, it wasn't long. Yeah, like I said, I think it was the very next year that they did Hunter Prey.
Okay. Because I feel like that's such a major character to just introduce, have him do something that no one had ever really done before, and then just be like, yeah, we're done. Like, you're not going to talk about that guy again. Yeah.
Well, since you brought that up, what were your thoughts on finding out in this movie that he was again a dark side doing?
I feel like them shoehorning Darkseid in just in general, and then
Yeah.
also shoehorning in like Cyborg, Superman's motivation, and Doomsday motivation. It really, I feel, kind of took the story down a little bit. Like it
I
really
agree.
kind of hurt the story. Like as much as because Doomsday is a big character in himself, but Darkseid is such a massive character that like shoehorning him into this story really felt like it was doing the story a disservice and Darkseid himself a disservice.
Yeah, I disagree. I don't. I disagree with their use of dark side. I think again, like, it diminished Doomsday just to make him some. I think Darkseid refers to him as like a machine, which Chad and I questioned when we did Superman Doomsday was that Doomsday supposed to be a robot? But I think it takes away from that. It kind of hurt them doing something like Hunter Prey, bringing that into this storyline, which I think now then the animated stuff they've already reset things where they could go back and do this, but they would have to do Death again. And then yeah, we've already said the same thing with Cyborg Superman. Just it was like I get that you're wanting to use Darkseid because you've got a plan for Darkseid, but at the same time, I yeah, it took away from the amazing storyline you already have as a source for this one.
Yeah, I would agree. And there's just so many places where we let's get into why I was annoyed by Hank Henshaw. Um, so he's and we have to talk about Death of Superman again because that's where his annoying me started. So him
Okay.
and his wife and the two people are out in space,
Hmm.
and they're like, hey, somebody calls him and it's like, there's something coming, you got to get out of the way. And he's like, well, Superman will save us, don't worry.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, yeah, Superman is gonna save you, but at a certain point, you kind of have to try to save yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
And then so like he's blaming Superman for his own death as well as his wife's death. He apparently doesn't care about his two friends at all. He doesn't bring them up.
Yeah.
Um, but like it's like, man, it as much as it might be, it's not even remotely close to being Superman's fault, even though like the asteroid was sent to get him and from Doomsday. But it's I mean it's your fault. Like you had an opportunity to get away, and you're like, nah, we don't have to. Superman will be here and save us.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. And then and I do get that. Like at that point, then like he's not in the right mindset, and then not Doomsday, Darkseid perverts his art, his pain and anguish, and makes it that much worse, and just kind of brainwashes him into doing what the becoming a useless character again, and therefore kind of really bringing the whole cyborg Superman character down to just kind of like, whatever.
What seems to be the problem, pal?
There's just so much pain in the world, so many issues. I don't think I can bear it.
Hell, friendo, it sounds like you could use a dose of pop culture roulette.
Pop Culture Roulette? What's that? Some sort of pop culture themed podcast or something?
That's right, sonny boy. When hope seems far, dive into some PCR.
But I already get my entertainment news from Variety.
Huh, that's pretty good. If you're a chucklehead, PCR gives you news you need, condensed, unfiltered, and raw, from three nerds who know a little something about something.
Wow, okay, sign me up.
That's the spirit. Pop Culture Roulette. New episodes every Monday, available on all major podcast directories.
Well, let's get into the comic and the moving panels, as we like to call it. It of course, in Death of Superman, they connect the crash with Doomsday coming to Earth. But as we know in the comic, Doomsday has actually been buried in the Earth for thousands, if not millions of years. And it's a solar flare, which you can go back and listen to Chad and I's episode from last week, where I probably get into a little bit more detail, but I'll kind of sum it up here. Gets hit by a solar flare, which they then connect to when Superman threw the Eradicator into the sun. Although Terry Henshaw later tells Superman there's no way that those happened at the same time. But for those of you who didn't hear it, I'm going to get, because Nicholas brought it up, I'm going to give you the Fantastic Four connection. So this is Adventures of Superman 466 in May of 1990. So this 2 or 3 years before you would have this. They crash onto Earth. So it doesn't blow up in space like it did in the first movie. They crash onto Earth. The younger person of the four becomes pure cosmic radiation. Blah, blah, blah. He ultimately kind of just goes crazy and he flies into the sun, killing himself. Then you've got the pilot who becomes made up of earth and materials from the wreckage and becomes this quote-unquote thing. And he later commits suicide by putting himself into kind of like an MRI machine and just rips himself apart. Then it comes to Terry Henshaw, Hank Henshaw's wife. She seems fine initially, but then she slowly starts to phase out as if she's phasing to another dimension. So she kind of becomes invisible. Superman is able to cure her. So she actually doesn't die in the explosion in the comic. She's cured by Superman with the help of Hank. Hank himself, his body starts to deteriorate, but he does some stuff to find a cure. He's not able to save himself as he dies, but he's able to help Superman save Terry. Hank eventually comes back a few issues later, and he is now his essence is now part of computers, and he's able to control technology. He confronts Terry, who is just shocked to see him. Long story short, Hank realizes that him being there is causing a lot of issues with technology and might cause a crisis. So he decides to leave, and he leaves by sending himself from a NASA satellite into Superman's shuttle, which is out in space from the storyline, coincidentally enough, with the Eradicator. Sends it up there, and then he takes a piece of it and launches himself into space. And that was the last we see of Hank Henshaw till he returns here as the cyborg Superman. And once he's the cyborg Superman, all the time he's spent in space, he's kind of become delusional, thinking that it's all Superman's fault, going back to that sun flare, that solar flare. So I get you can't do all of that until this story.
Yeah.
So I am fine with him quote unquote dying and his wife dying in the crash initially. I don't know how I feel again about the dark side thing, because I think again it takes away from him, especially the part, and that's why I kind of want to tell the story. I wanted to tell that story really quick. They do not have any of that he can control technology in this movie.
Nope.
And I think that was really a missed thing, because it's such an important part of the Reign of Superman storyline. Even the fact, and Chad and I talked about this last week, the fact that he actually takes control of Steel's suit at one point in the comic.
Yeah, I mean, there was just a lot of missed opportunities with Steel and Cyborg. I mean, they didn't really do much different with the Eradicator. I mean,
they did the Eradicator wrong in this movie.
I know. I mean, because I remember now. You can tell me, all right, because again, I have to try to put everything in Marvel terms. With this Hank Henshaw storyline, when they made the reveal that this is really Hank Henshaw has become this demented version, and because he really thought he was Superman for a little while, because of the whole Superman shuttle, and then finally he came to terms with it. This was kind of out of left field. I mean, obviously they had a plan because they were able to. Are you talking
about Cyborg Superman, or are you talking about Eradicator?
Cyborg Superman. Eradicator is a hologram that can do a lot of things that a hologram shouldn't be able to do. But
again, they did them wrong.
So when you're reading the comic book and they make this reveal when they in '93 when they reveal this is really Hank Henshaw, you're like, how many people are like, who?
Well, but they at least, and Chad brought this up in the one shot, at least when they reveal it in the Reign of Superman storyline, they do tell the story very over the course of 2 or 3 pages.
Okay.
They have Cyborg explain it all. Whereas Eradicator, he was a character that came from even before, because you heard me say a lot of stuff that dealt with Eradicator then caused Hank. Eradicator was first off a machine that was in the late 80s. He was just this little machine that is let's see if I can tell this story very quickly. But he was created by the Science Council of Krypton when there was kind of a uprising of people who wanted to go against the science, and he was created to protect the way of Krypton, which may have been a negative thing, but he was there to protect Krypton. So anyone who went against the way of Krypton, he would eradicate. He eventually, though, once he found Kal-El, Superman, which was, I think, the very first time we're ever introduced to Mongol, and they find out he's truly Kryptonian, the Eradicator changes its programming to, okay, if my job is to protect Krypton, this is now the last Kryptonian. My job is now to protect Kal-El. Superman would then bring the Eradicator back to Earth. It would actually be this machine, Eradicator, that would build the Fortress of Solitude. Now, this is post-crisis. Now, the Fortress of Solitude had existed pre-crisis, but this is now post-crisis. And it would be the Eradicator that would build the Fortress of Solitude in the Antarctic. And of course, Superman would later find out that its intention behind building the fortress was starting to turn Earth into a new Krypton, which is where this gets evil. You know, he finds out it's really evil, and it starts to try to, you know, again, protect anything that's going against its objective. And one of those things just happens to be Jonathan Kent. And so when the Eradicator attempts to eradicate Jonathan Kent, that's, of course, when Superman goes, and, and breaks it and throws it into the sun, which is what caused that. That then leads to 91 with actually the first issue of Man of Steel. This was the very first Man of Steel #1. You get an event happening at the sun where you end up finding out that the energy that was inside the Eradicator machine has now taken human form, which I could really argue was maybe a connection to my mind just went like Nuclear Man from Superman 4.
Oh yeah.
Because he even has the tunic, like kind of like what Nuclear Man wears. It doesn't have the little sun on the front, but it's a Kryptonian like tunic. And he emerges in human form. He comes back, and of course his goal is to stop Superman. And ultimately they end up kind of making the connection with this movie. Superman, but it's really Professor Hamilton. For those of you who know Superman comics, you know who Professor Hamilton is. They trap him inside of a gym. And so the Eradicator is inside of a gym, which Superman then takes back to the fortress to keep safe. And that's what eventually leads to this version of Eradicator. Because when Superman dies, the programming of the Eradicator needs to take back over. The Superman robots in the fortress say, you know, hey, we need this to come back. And that's how he takes the form of Superman and quote unquote becomes the Superman. So he really thinks he is Superman in the comics.
Okay.
Again, that's a very brief, trying to give you like 3-4 years worth of comics.
Yeah.
In a nutshell there.
Yeah, all right. So I guess I was a little off there by saying they got that one right, but they just, I mean, they didn't have much to do with. I mean, I feel like maybe only being an hour and a half movie really did this storyline a disservice. Maybe it should have been a couple movies, or you know, a little
like
bit
do the rain have at least make it all the way up to Cyborg Superman revealing to be the villain, and then do a return of Superman.
Yeah, because it
make this a trilogy.
Because I mean, you spent next to no time with the Eradicator. I mean, they revealed
absolutely no time.
They revealed Superboy was a clone like 5 minutes into revealing Superboy.
Well, they kind of do that in the comic too, though.
Yeah, and then the world. Now I don't know where, you know, because it's comics, so everything is a little bit different. The fact that Superman exists in their world where he doesn't exist in the real world, you know, they're like, oh, Superboy is a clone, and everybody's just like, all right, I'm cool with that. Like, nobody goes, wait, there's that technology? Like, this exists? Like, that's a thing? Like,
and I don't think they even bring, now that you're saying that, I don't think that's even really discussed in the comic. It's not. I think one of the first time he's interviewed on television in the comic, he says he's a clone. Like, that's not in question. Just like, you know, Steel never admits he's Superman.
Yeah, because, I mean, and he does say that in the movie. He's like, I never said I was Superman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, they I never thought about that. No one goes, wait, what?
Wait.
We're cloning Superman?
That's a technology we have? Like,
yeah, I never thought about that.
It struck me as odd because, you know, he says, you know, Lois Lane says it in like a TV report, like, oh, Superboy, or, you know, they're in a TV report, like, Superboy's really just a clone, and people are just like, all right, cool, whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, they do immediately have him, you know, working with Lex or for Lex to start off with, which is part of the comic. You know, there's the Supergirl aspect with Supergirl's in a relationship with Lex Luthor. Of course, it's Lex Luthor the second in the comic, which is, that's a long story. Chad and I talked a little bit about it in the one shot. And they do get Superboy to work with him. Lex is trying to manipulate Superboy so that he would have him on his side. So that was all connected. I like that. I had no problem with that. Taking the Cadmus stuff out of it, okay, fine with that as well.
But you talked
But
about it a lot in that episode, and you just brought it up. Take the entire Supergirl subplot of the reign of Superman. Not in this movie at all. Like, there's
no,
no reference to her.
but I'm okay with that because, as Chad and I talked about, that wasn't really Supergirl. Like it was Matrix
Yeah, all right.
posing as Supergirl, and so that would be another thing of how do you handle
Yeah, I
all
get.
of that element.
Well, it's just like they put in Darkseid, and they're like, let's take out everything else.
Yeah, well, there's some truth to that, but I again, Death of Superman was so good, and it came down a notch with Rain, and I do think it's that same issue like we're talking about, and I know Chad and I talked about with Superman Doomsday, is they had too much to cover in such a short amount of time. Death of Superman was different because you're talking about really 4 issues that you just had to condense down into a 70-75 minute movie. But now we're talking about taking what was 4 months, 3 months worth of comics, and you're now condensing it down into an hour and a half. So I do think a lot was missed. I wouldn't have been against making it a trilogy and doing Reign of Superman and then Return of Superman as a complete separate thing. And maybe you could have still left the dark side stuff, whatever. But yeah, it was just a little, because even the stuff like Chad talked about, loving the stuff about Cyborg Superman doing everything to gain the trust of the nation and the president and all that. That's just a blip in this movie.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like I felt like in this, and because it was such a short time, like people just were automatically like, well, that's Superman, and you're like, but he just showed up, and like you
Yeah.
just they, because they truncated the story by such a small amount. It would have been nice to do a trilogy. It'd be because the movie just came out, what, 3 years ago, 4 years ago,
2019, yeah.
2019. There's no way they're redoing it now. I mean, granted, they did Doomsday, and then barely 10 years later they did Death of Superman. I think because they realized how bad they messed up with Doomsday.
Yeah.
It would be. I would like to see maybe like a mini series, or like do if you're not going to do a live action, which might be difficult to do, but do an animated, like kind of like an Invincible. Do like a show, like not like instead of trying to push it all into a 2 hour movie. Do an 8 hour, a 10 hour episode, miniseries. Give yourself time to fill in some of the blanks that maybe the comic didn't have, or like, hey, what was Batman doing, or what, granted in this movie they sent them all off into some
Little pocket
dimension.
dimension, yeah.
Yeah, but if you're gonna do it more in the real story, like what were these guys doing? Where were they while all of this was happening? Do kind of more of an epic big scale.
Yeah. We talk about that a lot. I know we've talked about that on other episodes of I'd like to see this better as a series, or I'd like to see this better. And I think too much of the time we are saying, I want to see the comics brought to life.
Yeah,
Like,
and I will say, like that is one of the things that, like, Watchmen with Zack Snyder, like,
yeah,
everybody bags on it because they're like, well, it's too much like the comic. Well, but that's the problem. Like, you wanted the
except the
comic.
ending.
Well, except the
Yeah.
ending, and I will argue, in as much as I bag on Zack Snyder on PCR, I feel like Zack Snyder kind of fixed the ending of the Watchmen in the movie.
Oh, you didn't like the giant octopus?
Yeah, I thought in the book it was kind of stupid. I think that he, but I know a lot of people are will always bag on that movie because they're like, oh, it's just too shot for shot or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but that's what
Yeah,
made
but
that's what I thought was made The Watchmen like a really good movie, at least in
yeah.
my opinion. And it's been a long time since I've watched it. Maybe if I watched it again, like, I'd have a different opinion. But
Well, spoiler for everybody. That's our March Madness next year.
oh, okay, all right, well then,
So
I'm sure I'll be counted in there somewhere, but at least I hope I am, since I brought it up. But so like, yes, I mean, I would like to see the comic, but what I was saying, I wouldn't just don't keep it to just the comic. Like, you can expand upon the story a little bit. Um, there are ways where you can do the storyline, because even in print, like you are limited in what you can do per panel. Obviously, you don't really have
Yeah.
action, scenes. But like you said, like the crossover world with Superman, and I can't remember. I think it was pretty much just limited to the world of Superman. Like
For the most part, yeah.
whatever Batman and Aquaman and Wonder Woman were doing, unless they were included in that particular issue, they were still off doing their thing. Where
Yeah.
like when you get to like Civil War with Marvel, like everything was Civil War. Every storyline stopped and became Civil War.
Yeah, I do think that was a negative for Civil War, and I know Chad and I have talked about this before too, is I think Civil War, which I think was the closest Marvel has ever come to an event like Death of Superman. But
Right.
I think they made it too big. And so whereas Death of Superman and even Reign of Superman, like you're saying, it's contained mostly within these four Superman titles. And so you being able to give that to someone, or you got the trade backs where you could say, here's the Death of Superman, read that, or here's the World Without Superman, which is Funeral for a Friend and like a couple of other issues. Here, read that. Here's Return of Superman, which is usually the reign all the way to the return. Here, read that. Civil War is a lot harder to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, they have the trade backs, but there's so many of the trade backs. Like, there's Civil War X-Men trade back. There's the Civil War Punisher trade back. There's the Civil War.
Yeah. No.
And so being able to completely follow that story is just near to impossible.
But so like, I mean, but you have the ability to, if you did a series and it did a season or two, you could explore some of the stuff that was happening and bring in some of the other stuff and do things that weren't necessarily directly just shot for shot remakes of the book, and expand upon some of the stuff that maybe they didn't have time to expand on, or really just kind of like, comics, so what's happening over here.
But let's get back to the movie, and I want to ask you, because you were talking about Watchmen, and we briefly talked about the ending being changed. Let's talk about this ending. Now, how familiar are you with the way the comic storyline ends?
Vaguely familiar. I mean, like I said, I did go on a deep dive on Wikipedia, so I read it, but I don't necessarily know if I comprehended it all.
So, long story short, they invade Engine City, which in the movie it's now the Watchtower. It's Superman, it's Steel, Superboy, of course Supergirl's in there, Green Lantern's even in there in the comic. Whereas this one, it's Superman, it's really Superman and Lois. And ultimately Eradicator recuperates. He had been taken out earlier by Cyborg Superman, but he recuperates enough that he joins the fight, and he joins it just in time that he stands between Cyborg Superman and Superman when Cyborg Superman tries to blast him with this full shot of kryptonite. It hits Eradicator, passes through Eradicator, and because Eradicator's made up of Kryptonian energy and technology, it is what gives Superman back his powers. And it's kind of it's a redemption story arc for Eradicator as well, because again, he starts off as this, no morals, no ethics Superman who has no problem killing, because he just sees it as a certain way, to eventually, ultimately sacrificing himself. And so you get that, then Superman punches Cyborg Superman, vibrates his fist fast enough to cause him to explode, in essence. Whereas in this one, you ultimately have Lois Lane being the hero, because she stops Cyborg, she distracts him, she does the, Bruce Willis running through the glass from Die Hard as she's getting blasted by the heat vision. so that she ultimately can open up the windows and expose Superman to pure sunlight to give him back his powers. And then you have this really odd moment, which is what I also want you to talk about, of Cyborg Superman telling Superman, "You won't kill me." And Superman saying, "You're right. I'm not programmed that way. But I have this crystal, and I'm going to jam it in your forehead, which is ultimately killing you. So even though I have said I will not kill you, I pretty much kill you by jamming this crystal into your forehead, which is supposed to be the Eradicator." I don't like this ending.
Yeah, the ending didn't make a lot of sense to me, because he's like, yeah, I won't kill you, but I got this program that will. And then, like you said, he jams him in the head, which would kill just about anybody. I mean, I know he's a robot, so maybe that's why. I mean, I guess that's how he's like,
Yeah.
well, but I'm not actually killing him. It's the program that's doing it. But it's like, yeah,
But that's like saying I'm not killing you. It's the knife I jammed into your heart
yeah,
that's killing you.
I don't. It's never mind that. That could take us down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, we're not going to get political.
Yeah, I was about to say something, but
I just think it takes away from the Eradicator story, which, like I said, they just do the Eradicator so wrong, because there he is, then he just disappears in this movie. Because, yeah, I mean, he just disappears. And then all of a sudden it's, hey, he's inside this crystal, and I'm going to infect you with the Eradicator, and that's what's going to stop you. I just I have a problem. I don't mind Lois giving him the sunlight. I always think Superman getting the big blast of sunlight, which gives him his energy back. I'm kind of a little biased on that. I think that's always a cool way for him to, it's almost like Popeye, getting his spinach at just the last moment. I'm okay with that. But it was the crystal to the forehead. It was the lines of, I'm not going to kill you, that's not in my programming, and then jamming him with the crystal. Maybe if he had shoved the crystal into that hole that Cyborg Superman had pulled the dark side part out of, maybe that would be different, because it would be like, I'm putting that where that other thing was, and so it's like inserting a USB drive. But he just jabs it right in the middle of his forehead.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, now the more I think about it, the more, I hadn't thought of it that way. But yeah, no, you're right. That is problematic, I'm guessing, is the word I'm looking for.
And then finally, I want to, did you stay for the end credit scene?
Was there a
Did you
credit?
know there was an end credit scene?
Yeah, you know what? I almost always fast forward through the credits to see if there's end credit scenes on movies anymore, even movies from the 80s, just in case.
Yeah.
And for some reason I didn't do that, and now I'm regretting it.
So, well, I don't know if you'd regret it too much. So the end credit scene, if you go to the very end, it is the Justice League talking about, pretty much they're saying, well, hey, if Darkseid wants to bring the war to us, let's bring the war to him. And then all of a sudden Lex Luthor walks in, and he's wearing his, power suit, and he says, I'm in. And that's it. There's no follow-up to this. Like, there is no Lex Luthor working with the Justice League to fight Darkseid in another movie. The stuff they did with Darkseid then went into the Justice League Dark animated movies.
Okay. Because didn't they do an Apocalypse War movie?
Yes, but it was Justice League Dark, Apocalypse War.
Okay, all right.
And that also ended the New 52 in the animated universe. Because at the very end of that, so many of the Justice League has been taken out, or they've been partly converted into like half robot by Darkseid. And so they have where Flash takes off running, and then there's the big like white flash, and that's supposed to be he's reset everything. But like I said, that's a different movie for a different time. But yeah, there was no follow up to this one, and so it's such a strange end credit scene when they didn't do anything with it. Because Rainn Wilson would not return again as the voice of Lex. So
So I guess well, there's I'm sure I've done the episode. It probably was in the old run, but there's probably an episode that I could do on movies that promise sequels that never uh, came
Yeah,
about,
never went anywhere. Yeah,
never went anywhere. Like, you know, ended it with like, and so will return, and then that movie never,
yeah,
the second one never happened. This maybe I could include Reign of Superman into that list of here's the
maybe.
sequel that we promised, and then we just didn't do anything
Just
with it.
just to throw this out, I never read the books, but Aragon. I went and saw that movie in theaters, and it is clearly just a part one of this big series that just never went anywhere.
Yeah, well, when you bomb that hard,
Yeah, that one still sticks with me though.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Bag it, stack it, or trade it. We've kind of maybe revealed our hand a little bit here, but let's find out. So, Nicholas, what do you say?
Well, I think I'm going to surprise you a little bit
Okay.
because, well, initially I was never going to give it a Baggett status.
All right.
I was gonna give it. I think I'm gonna stick with it because I don't have the history with the books, and I obviously am not the Superman fan that you are, given the room that you're sitting in, and I'm currently wearing a Thor shirt.
Nothing wrong
I'm
with
gonna
that.
say stack it because it
Okay.
was at the end of the day, it's still like problems notwithstanding, it still was a mostly enjoyable movie. It's not bad. I mean, it's not like one of those movies like, yeah, I saw it and I'm never going to watch it again. Like if I
Hmm.
was, if I was hanging out or like, somebody was like, "Oh, if I want to watch that Death of Superman story." Okay, cool. I'll watch that again. So I don't necessarily want to throw it in the trade it stack because it wasn't awful, but it wasn't necessarily good either. So like it's definitely not. So I think I'm going to leave it in the stack it category.
Okay. I'm not against that. I will say I went back and forth with this one, and I'm probably going to do something new that I've never done before, at least not that I can recall. I'm going to give this a bag it, but with a stipulation. This is a bag it until they make a better version.
Okay.
Because when you put this with Death of Superman, I think for a movie version of this storyline, this is the best we've gotten and the best we might get. So you take Death of Superman, Reign of Superman, so you would, as one cohesive story, and I know I'm kind of stretching this a little bit because I'm talking about both and not just the one. That's what puts it into a bag it. If you're talking about the movie standalone, yeah, I'd probably say stack it. But as you and I have already said, you can't watch this movie as a standalone.
Correct.
You have to watch it with Death. And so by putting it with Death, that's where I say it's a bag it for me because it's the best we're going to get of this full storyline. But again, until they give us something better. So that's why I'm giving it a bag it. As a standalone movie, yes, stack it, but it can't be a standalone movie, so bag it as the complete story of the death and return of Superman.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me on this, our Summer of Superman, which is, so sadly coming to an end. Next week, Chad and I will talk about the legacy. We'll talk about the return of Superman in the comics, but we'll mostly talk about the legacy of this storyline as we wrap up this Summer of Superman. But thank you, Nicholas, for joining us. Anything you got coming up on Pop Culture Roulette that you would like to share?
No, we just managed to stretch that one topic into 5 different episodes
Of who played it
of
best?
who played it best. So
Yeah.
we're kind of worn out a little bit. So we took a couple week break, and I think we're gonna get back into just doing some regular episodes for a little while, just some the just random news stories, and not try to because that did take a lot out of us trying to put that together. You did give me the idea for the bracket, which I did figure out how to do. Because, well, when I get challenged to make a bracket, I find a way, and I did, and then that took it into 5 episodes instead of just maybe one or two that it should have been in the first place. But
You are a master of the bracket, which is why I have you coming a little bit later to do a bracket with me here, as we're going to talk about the best comic book movie of the '90s. That'll be coming in probably about a month or so. So stay tuned for that one. But thank you, Nicholas, for joining me. Anything you wanna say here? Any last words? Maybe about this experience with reliving this death and return of Superman storyline?
I mean, it brought up a lot of nostalgic feelings because it was stuff I hadn't thought about from I'm trying to remembering going to the comic book store in the '90s and trying to buy the books and just getting into it and and then putting down comics again for a long time and then picking them back up and just going, oh man, and just kind of wishing that maybe I had never put them down. But I mean, it just
I mean, just have those ebbs and flows,
yeah. But it is it was fun getting back into it, and it's nice. And now maybe maybe I'll see if I can't hunt those books down and give them a read, And I'm sure I have some of the original issues from first printings of the Reign of the Superman. I don't know if they're in what condition they're in, but I know I've got.
But that doesn't matter when they're yours.
I know. I'm sure I've got some of them in the long boxes down in the basement. So.
Yeah, I mean, me being the Superman guy, I've got multiple copies. I've got my copies from 92, 93, and then I've bought copies since then. Because, like you said, the copies I have, they're going to be used. They're going to be, worn and red and bent. But, I'll find the nicer copy that I can add into my collection. But yeah, that's what I think's been so fun about this summer of Superman stuff is, like you said, a lot of us who are part of this show, we've been into comics since we were a kid. And yeah, we may have had those moments where we kind of faded away from them, but there's always something that pulled us back. For some people who read comics, it was this death of Superman storyline that pulled them back into comics. And there may have been a lull a little after that, but I also think kind of the idea behind this podcast is, in 2008, when the MCU got started and when the DCEU, hit or miss with them, once this resurgence of the superhero genre in movies and TVs got going, it had people like us, like you said, relive that nostalgia and go back and reread these stories that we loved as a kid. But I also think it's brought people to these stories that they may have never read before. And so that's what I've loved so much about this, doing this summer. And I've loved every minute of rereading these comics and even going off and reading some of the side stuff. Like I told you before we started recording, I'm reading that Bloodline story that loosely connected along the way. And after you and Chad have both talked about it, I think I'm even going to sit down and reread Nightfall, which followed this the very next year. So that's what I think is so great about this genre, and I think it needs that ebb and flow, because you won't have that nostalgia unless you did veer away from it for a while. So that's where I stand on that.
I would agree.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Again, we got one more episode for this summer of Superman next week, where Chad and I will talk about the legacy of this storyline. So stay tuned for that one. Rate and review the show. Give us those 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Write a written review. Let other people know. And also make sure you check out Pop Culture Roulette with Nicholas Pepin. That's always a fun one. And again, he's done a great bracket series over who's played it best, which has had me thinking I'm going to rip that off like I did his some of his other brackets, but that'll maybe be down the road. Great conversations, lots of up to the minute pop culture talk with him and his panel, and so check those out as well. But thanks everybody for listening. For today, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and listen to an 80s Flick Flashback podcast once in a while, you could miss it. Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes, VCRs, and the video rental stores? Does the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? My name is Tim Williams. I'm the creator and host of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. On each episode, I'm joined by guest co-hosts to discuss one of the many movies released in the 1980s. We share our first-time watch memories, our favorite scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories about the cast and crew along the way. New episodes are released every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an excellent episode of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. The ad is over. Go home. Go.